Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
Both at PWOP Studios
Here we are, face to face, my brother.
What does this happen, once every 2 years?
Something. I think we almost do it every year now. There's always an excuse for me to be on the East Coast.
Yeah, that's right. Well, why are you here this time?
I'm working on a couple of things I can't really talk about right now, and I had to be in Boston for a few days.
Okay.
And so if I'm going to be in Boston, I got to come down to New London. It's kind of a rule.
So needless to say, you were in Boston for something other than .NET Rocks,
Yes,
and you decided to come down and visit, and we hung out with the Miller Mangiacotis last night.
We did.
It was almost like a Monday's episode, just sitting around the table.
I believe there were pictures taken.
That's cool.
On my way out the door this morning, because I spent the night there, Karen's like, I hope the mess isn't there. It's just, I stay here for the chaos, Karen. Like, if I didn't want chaos, I'd stay in a Holiday Inn. I'm here for the chaos.
It's a feature.
It is a feature. It is a ton of fun. And the little Campbell Franklin is 6 years old and cute as a button.
That's so cool.
He's growing up.
He's growing up. All right, well, let's roll the music because I have a call-in for Better Know Framework.
Awesome. All right, dude, what do you got?
This one was called in by one Paul Seal, who wrote this very cool, concise, which is what I like about it, blog post. What is .NET Core? 7 things you should know.
Hey, look, there's even 7 things in it.
Yeah. And so the first one, what is .NET Core? It is a new platform from Microsoft made up of a new runtime and a set of libraries. The main reason for it existing is to make .NET run cross-platform, which means it will run on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS.
Right.
What language do you write .NET Core applications in? Funny, you should ask. .NET Core applications are written in C#, F#, and VB.NET. This means you can write C# code on Linux and Mac now, and this is why applications like Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio for Mac have been made. Number 3, what type of applications would you use .NET Core for? You can write console apps, web APIs, and ASP.NET websites right now with .NET Core. It's not fully written yet, so the tooling is limited at the moment.
And you see what's really missing from that list, which is anything on the real client side.
That's right.
Do a normal client app.
Number 4, do I need to learn .NET Core? You only need to learn .NET Core if you want to write .NET applications which need to run cross-platform. If you're just building applications which are going to be hosted on Azure or on a Windows server somewhere, you can continue to write them in the full .NET framework. I would add the performance of .NET Core, especially running on Linux on a web application, is higher.
Pretty serious.
Pretty serious.
Take some tweaking to get it up there, though. But
Right.
it can be done. And I think that's right now, today, when I'm meeting folks that are actually doing stuff in Core, that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Is websites on Linux.
For performance reasons. All right. Number 5, will it replace the full .NET framework? No. It's not going to replace the full .NET framework. The full framework continues to exist and be improved alongside .NET Core. Very good point.
And we've done shows on that, right? Jeff Fritz is talking about the ASP.NET web forms.
Yeah. Number 6, is it compatible with the full .NET framework? Yes. .NET Core is compatible with certain versions of the full framework as well as Xamarin's Mono framework. It can be confusing to understand which version of one is compatible with other versions. To help with this, they have created the .NET Standard.
Dun, dun, dun. We've done a show on this.
Yeah, it's true. But this is great. It's concise.
Yes.
Number 7, what is .NET Standard? Funny you should ask. .NET Standard was created to help you know what version of the .NET framework you need to target if you want your code to be compatible with other types of .NET framework. Currently, there are 3 types: the full .NET framework, Mono, which is used for Xamarin, and .NET Core. It's hard to know which version of which framework is compatible with others. .NET Standard isn't anything physical. It's not even code itself. It's just a set of features, very important, a set of features which a version of a .NET framework needs to have to be compatible with others targeting it. That means if you're trying to talk to code from a different version of the .NET framework, it'll have the necessary features to be compatible if it targets the same version of the .NET Standard.
You know, there are more versions of the .NET framework than that, right? Like that's the crazy part.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm glad they're finally doing the standard thing, irrespective of Core, just because there's been many versions of the framework running around out there.
Yeah, that's right.
Some of the micro and embedded editions. And
we have the whole history documented right here on .NET Rocks, especially the whole 4 to 4.5 thing, where it's updated in place and you don't know what version it is.
Yeah, and it almost doesn't matter except when it does.
Except when it does, yeah. So that's what I got, Richard. And thanks to Paul for sending that in.
Yep.
And you know what, Paul? I'm going to send you a mug just because that's awesome stuff.
A big pile of awesome. And we included the link on the show notes. So
yep.
You don't have to memorize it. You can just come here.
Awesome. So who's talking to us, Richard?
Grabbed a comment off of show 1411. That's the one we did with Gil Clearin when we talked about Xamarin MVVM apps. That was at NDC London.
Yep.
And got a bunch of good comments on the show. But this one from Timothy Lewis really hit me. He says, I believe you mentioned the fact that it's surprising there aren't more web-deployed apps in this show.
Oh.
And that was our whole conversation about, going into the App Store versus doing progressive web apps, like that kind of thing. Tim goes on to say, the great issue with apps that aren't deployed from the App Store is that they almost always ignore taxation in places like the EU, with VAT and things like that, and South Africa, which means that for developers in large parts of the world, just putting your app on the website isn't as straightforward as it should be.
Right.
The point being, if you're going to put on a website, and you don't want to get in trouble with the tax man, you have to follow these rules.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things the App Store just does for you,
right,
for better or worse. Since the EU rules were introduced in December of 2015, I wouldn't dream of trying to sell an app anywhere but on the App Store.
Okay.
And
that's true.
And I really don't like app stores, but this one punches me right in the gut because you're like, you know what, Timothy, you're right. That is a non-trivial problem. If you are going to sell an app, you want help with the retail rules. Yeah. You want to have a professional like Apple or Google or Microsoft doing those taxation things for you. I mean, they're just going to collect the money from the customer. But the law is if you don't collect the money, you still owe it.
Yeah.
So, good point, man.
That's true.
Yeah. So, Timothy, thank you so much for your comment. A .NET Rocks mug is on its way to you. And if you'd like a .NET Rocks mug, write a comment on the website at .NETRocks.com or via any of our social media because we publish every show to Facebook and Google+. And if you comment there and we read it on the show, we'll send you a mug.
And definitely follow us on Twitter. I'm at Carl Franklin. He's at Rich Campbell. Send us a tweet. We convert them to .NET Core and run them on our Macs.
Nice. That's an Ubuntu laptop there, sir. Do not disparage my machine. He said running a Surface Book with Win 10.
Mac, Ubuntu, same difference.
Same thing.
Let's see how many people
make them all angry at once, right? Nice. Well done.
All right, let's bring on our guest, Joe Audette. He's a Microsoft MVP, started working out with Access 2.0 in 95 and VB6 back in 1996. He's been doing web development since the beginning with classic ASP and then ASP.NET when it first came out. Over the years, he's done quite a bit of work in content management and e-commerce. Speaking of tax laws, he wrote the blog module for a thing called Rainbow Portal back in 2003 and founded the Mojo Portal project in 2004. He actively developed Mojo Portal and commercial add-on features until late 2014. He began working on a new set of web components in late 2014 with MVC 5 and moved to ASP.NET Core in June of 2015, beta 4 or 5.
That's back in the pain times.
Yeah. He said beta 4 or 5. It's like, not sure which.
Pain times.
Which is it again? Now he has a number of related open source projects and components branded as cloudscribe. The main projects are cloudscribe.core, which is a multi-tenant web application foundation for managing sites, users, and roles, and cloudscribe.simplecontent, which is a blog and content database. He is currently trying to bootstrap his own business again, building commercial components that can integrate with ASP.NET Core apps, including but not limited to any open source apps. You can read his blog at joeaudette.com. That's JoeAudette.com, powered by CloudScribe, by the way. And follow him on Twitter at Joe Audette. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, thanks for having me on here. This is great.
We had you on once before, but not as a guest proper, right?
That's right. It was many years ago when your tour came through Nashville. I got to chat with you guys on your RV and have a beer with you.
That was like 2005.
It was.
That was still my first 50 shows.
That was the first road trip we did, wasn't it? Or was it the second?
No, it was the first one.
First.
It was the first one. It was totally your idea. Yeah. In the middle, and I figured it was your trap so that I couldn't get out of this thing after 50 shows because we were on the middle of the road trip with the show hit. I'm like, I can't go home. I'm stuck. I got to keep doing this. And now, 1,300 shows later, I'm still here.
I'm glad you stayed. As are everybody else.
I really like those vignette shows. Right, collecting stories, Joe. Your stories, like I remember the giant pumpkins guys,
giant pumpkin, yeah.
But I don't know that the listeners liked it near as much as we liked.
You're probably right, but we've moved on, and we learned that we can bring real guests to those events now and do a show that way, and that's what it has been. I wonder if we'll do that again. That was a lot of fun.
It was.
I think back then when I spoke with you guys, I was really into mono, or you pronounce it mono, I guess. I don't know now. Yeah. But that was back when I was working on Mojo Portal, and I may have mentioned it too, because that was cross-platform was a goal for me way back then, trying to get Mojo Portal running on mono to be a thing. And so now here we are today, and we've really got cross-platform with the .NET Core, and that's really exciting to me.
And I get the feeling we're just getting started. This was such a new thing for Microsoft to take on Mono and take on Xamarin and sort of merge their worlds and all of that stuff. It's only going to get better, I got to believe.
I think so. I think they've really done a great job with .NET Core. A lot of changes some have been painful tooling changes and things along the way, but they've had good reasons for everything they've done, and it's really coming out. It's a great framework to work with now, and I think next month they're supposed to ship VS 2017, and we'll finally get the official new tooling and whatnot.
Yeah, this show will probably come out after that tooling shipped, but I'm also thinking in terms of we've just been doing like the 15th anniversary celebrations for .NET, and here we are talking about all these new things in .NET. Like, it hasn't gone crufty, which is interesting. Like, how do you fight against that so successfully? Oh, rewrite the whole stack. Okay.
The newest thing in .NET, I think, is just that the whole term itself, .NET, has changed. It used to be a sort of a red flag for something on the Windows platform.
Right. In many languages, one platform?
And now it's a few languages, but many platforms.
Yeah.
It's going places we never thought it would go. What are some of the things that you like best about .NET Core?
Well, I was stuck in the web forms world for so long. I was kind of late to MVC when MVC first started coming out, and architectural improvements that have been made. I just find that it's a lot easier to do like the gang of four patterns that you read about now. You know? With web forms, everything was kind of componentized and encapsulated. It was not easy to do dependency injection and things like that. MVC was, but I was sort of stuck in a already built this big app in web forms, and I was just too busy with that to get involved with MVC. And it kept evolving. Different versions of MVC came out, and I guess
evolving fast too. I mean, I think it was very challenging when they were switching it so quickly.
Which I guess was a good thing in some ways, but then you got to keep upgrading as you go.
Yeah.
But when they started announcing, that it was going to be officially supported cross-platform, that's when I was like, I really need to start from scratch and write things a new way. And what I really like, dependency injection is awesome. I mean, program against the interface and inject that implementation. And if you need to change it, you just plug in a different one. And you can even like copy and modify and plug in and try something. And then, if that didn't work out, you could put the old one back in, So it gives you like a safety net for trying things out too. And it lends itself to writing code that's more testable and writing code that's single responsibility type of stuff.
Agreed.
And, I just like the way you could do it with MVC5, but I like the way it's just built right into the startup system, and you just wire everything up in a console app. And, I just like that model a lot. It's, kind of with Mojo Portal, it was kind of shipped as a big app. It had a plugin system, so you could write features that plugged into it, but you didn't, if you wanted to change something in the global ASAX, there wasn't a way for you to do that unless you got the source code or unless we built something in to allow you to plug it in.
Right.
Whereas with cloudscribe, I'm just focusing on publishing nuggets, and giving examples of how to wire it up. And then you own the app. And if you need to wire other stuff in there totally unrelated, that's your business, and you can do that with no problems.
I love what they've done with Katana and the way you can self-host ASP.NET. even in a console app, even in a WPF app if you want, running on some box somewhere, and this has actually saved my butt in situations where, a group wants a local web server. In other words, they want an app that only exists within their NAT, firewall area, and it doesn't exist outside, but they want to be able to pull up their phones and interact with it, and they want to use the web. And, you can just put a machine up there, and you can even use regular old DNS resolution to resolve to IP addresses that aren't routable. It's pretty amazing and pretty easy to do.
Well, and also goes along with that is you can include the runtime, and you can put it all on like a USB stick or even a DVD-ROM or something, and you can like run it right off of that thing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So like one of my projects, NoDB, which is a no database file system storage, I'm using it pretty much for everything when I'm prototyping stage, but I'm also building it to work. Like cloudscribe core can work with NoDB, simple content can work with it. But even if you're running a big production site, you probably wouldn't use that if you have lots of data. But I'm looking at it also as sort of a backup tool where I can just write something to export the data into that format, and then I could archive sites onto DVD-ROM, like a point-in-time copy with the data, and run it right off of there.
So cool.
What is this DVD speak of?
What's cool is just hearing these creative solutions. You're like Emeril Lagasse in the kitchen, and then we can add a little more garlic. Bam! Throwing a DVD-ROM, we just pull all these resources together because it's just so easy now with such cheap materials. Blows my mind.
Old ways you'd back up your database and back up your web files, and you have them on a disk, but you couldn't really use them or see what your site looked like back at that point in time without going ahead and installing it again in IIS or something and restoring the backup. To me, it seems like a great way to make actually useful backups. So
stuff you can actually trust.
And you can put it into a Mac or a Linux or Windows because you can include all three runtimes in there.
Yeah, that stuff just sort of works.
This episode of .NET Rocks is made possible in part by Windows on the Google Cloud Platform.
You may not know this, but the Google Cloud Platform supports Windows Server 2008, 2012, and 2016.
It also supports SQL Server versions 2012, 2014, and 2016 standard, web, and enterprise editions with high availability.
You can deploy your ASP.NET Windows apps to Compute Engine or your ASP.NET Core apps to App Engine or Container Engine. That's Google's hosted Kubernetes environment.
.NET and .NET Core libraries are there for all 200-plus Google.com and cloud services in NuGet, led by John Skeet of Stack Overflow fame.
But what about Visual Studio integration? Oh, it's there. You can use Visual Studio to manage your GCP resources and deploy your existing apps.
You get stack driver logging, error reporting, and tracing support for .NET and .NET Core.
PowerShell commandlets for GCP, which run on Windows and Linux.
And a great set of partners to bring your Windows and .NET workloads to GCP, including Capgemini, Neudesic, and Magenic.
So go to gcp.netrocks.com and get your free trial today.
I'm poking around your GitHub there, Joe. So clearly you have a tendency to just simply make projects. If you hear, I need a data store. I think I'll make a little database. Sure you do. So it's impressive, right?
It's not a database. No DB.
A lot of it,
not
when I first, I couldn't, when I put in my quote about beta 4, beta 5, I couldn't remember exactly which one, but it was pretty early on when I started working in .NET Core. And there were a lot of bits and pieces that just weren't available. So, things for like RSS feed, I was looking around, there was no system.component model.syndication stuff. And there was no, even that old Cook Computing XML RPC library, I think it was hosted on Google Code and it just went down. And
that brings back some memories.
I couldn't actually find the actual source code because I was going to see if I could port that. But so I just, I had to write my own. And now with, they're coming out with the Net Standard 2.0. They're adding more and more of these APIs back. So some of the things I've built won't necessarily be needed in the future, but some of them I had to build. In the MVC5 period when I was building prototypes, I was using a thing called MVC Sitemap Provider.
Right.
And then when I started working with Core, there was nothing like that. So I had to build my own, and I called it cloudscribe.navigation. And just, and it's similar in a lot of ways to that, but with a lot less features than what that had, and a lot of stuff that just wasn't needed that had. But, pagination, I built a little pager tag helper, and just everything I've built, I've tried to build it so that it's not, as loosely coupled as possible. My goal is for as many of these components to be possible to use them without other dependencies. But some things do depend on other things, but certain components, it just seems natural that anyone should be able to use that. So the navigation ones like that, the pagination ones like that, the logging ones like that.
How about authentication? Do you find that travels across platforms well?
In terms of loose coupling, or
Yep.
I mean, the cloudscribe core is a set of components. There's some bits that are interchangeable or not necessarily. In other words, it supports different data platforms. So you only need one of those, and there's 3 different ones or 4 available. But some of the components are kind of a set, and they're essential. So there's and this is one of the cool things with .NET Core is every project in your solution kind of corresponds to a NuGet package.
Nice.
Right.
In fact, in the early days, it was actually kind of cooler in the early days, because when you built the solution, it generated a NuGet, and that was like the build output. And it was, there wasn't like a bin folder where all your DLLs were like naked in there. It was just nuggets, and it seemed like it referenced them directly. I'm not entirely sure it did, but it seemed that way. But now you use .NET Pack to create your NuGets, and it still kind of corresponds to every project in the solution. So most of the identity stuff is in one NuGet, and then there's the web cloudscribe core.web depends on that, and it has the user interface for managing the users and whatnot. So it's mainly based on the actual ASP.NET identity interfaces, and just implemented the parts I needed to make it multi-tenant.
Yeah.
So like the user store and the role store are like tenant aware, and whenever you look up a user or a role or whatever, it's passing into like the site ID as part of the query. And so that's how that works.
Right.
And I used another project called SaaSkit, which was a big piece of the multi-tenancy. It allows you to branch your middleware per tenant. And
Interesting.
so you can, for host name tenants, it's pretty easy anyway, because browsers have different cookies per host name.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually have it where you can create a tenant with a first folder segment. So I have multiple options. You can do host name based, or you can do the folder segment. And that one was a little bit trickier, and the middleware branching was essential for that, so that I could have different cookie names and authentication schemes. And then that way, if you're logged into one tenant, you're not automatically in the other tenant too.
Right.
It keeps it separate.
Yeah. Was that a lot of work, or did it just seem like a natural flow of logic to you?
Well, the SaaSkit thing made it easy, because like in your startup, you can just go app.use per tenant, and you can pass in, there's like a resolver you create to identify the tenant on the request. So that made it easy to set those different cookie properties. There were some things, though, that weren't really solved by that. Like in the identity system, the ASP.NET identity system, the identity options get, kind of injected as a singleton into the middleware, and then that's it. So you have to make those match up to the authentication cookie names, and everything have to be the same as what identity expects them to be. So I had to do some extra magic to make that work. There's like the I options of T, and you can inject it options and get the value of it. So we did something with that made it where it could still resolve tenant-specific identity options by that mechanism, just kind of inside the getter for that thing.
So is it safe to say that if we wanted to build a website with multi-tenancy, maybe it's not a blog, maybe it's not maybe it's something completely different?
Humanitarian Toolbox, right?
Yeah, great example.
My Already project We're headed right for this. Right? I'm making notes right now. We're headed right at this because you're going to have different branches of the Red Cross. We're going to have different organizations. Right. And we could literally light up an instance per customer, but that's not what SaaS is about, right?
Sure.
Just because we're a charity doesn't mean we shouldn't be efficient. So the idea of having a set of tooling that would allow me to deal with those tenancy problems, I'm thrilled.
Right. Does that have a ripple effect, though, down to all of your APIs? Because it seems like, you were just saying now you have to pass in, a master ID for every, API. Is that a reality, or are there ways to get around that?
Well, we provide something to make it easy for you to get that tenant ID. But yeah, if you want to have data specific to tenants, you have to have something to tag that data.
Right. So you are carrying a tenant
it.
ID around, but that's the
price. But that's fine.
You can, but if you don't need the multi-tenancy features, you can just ignore that. And it's just, if you're only using a single tenant, you don't have to worry about that at all. It's only if you're trying to make sure your feature that you're building on top of it is going to be tenant aware, then you would need something to tag your data, and we make it easy for you to inject something that gives you that tenent ID. So,
right, and those are just the realities of modern software development.
But if that's the only thing you have to do, that's pretty
easy.
Small kind of thing. It's not like a hoops you have to jump through.
Absolutely.
Well, I grabbed that and fired it over to the Slack channel on Humanitarian Toolbox because we've been talking about exactly this issue and the fact that it's built with ASP.NET Core. And it's like, okay, people are solving problems for us.
Right. So to get back to my question, if you're a Humanitarian Toolbox and you're not using all of these other features of cloudscribe, is that something that can be used as a component or as a piece? Is it something that you can wedge in?
Yeah, I mean, you can. Even if you don't need multi-tenancy, you can just use it as your authentication system by pulling in the nuggets and wiring up some stuff in startup. It'll provide the login page and the register page, and you can configure whether to allow new registration. You can configure social authentication to let people register on your site. If you don't need the multi-tenancy, you just ignore it and don't use it. But then if you ever decided later, I'd like to, fire up another site, at least you've got the option to do it.
So this would be cloudscribe Core you're talking about, right?
Right.
Which is described here as a multi-tenant foundation for managing users, roles, claims, authentication, and authorization with support for social authorization. It has optional integration with Identity Server 4 to support authentication of remote or local APIs. That sounds pretty freaking awesome.
Yeah, no kidding.
So let's maybe go over a couple more of these features. But first, hey, Richard.
Yeah, buddy.
Guess what time it is?
Must be that happy time again.
Yeah. It's time to ask Joe a simple question about NoDB. Is that also not a mollusk?
Ooh, Mark Rendell callbacks.
Sorry. Joe is laughing, but I don't think he knows why.
It went right over my head is why I'm laughing. I have no idea.
However, it does have that British surrealism that only Mark Rendell could come up with. He has a tool called SimpleDB. And I asked him, what is SimpleDB? And he says, well, it's not an ORM. And I said, well, what else isn't it? And he said, it's not a mollusk.
Oh, yeah, I think I do remember that now.
So I went and registered notamollusk.com and had it sent to SimpleDB.
I remember you talking about that on the show.
Right. All right. Well, anyway, it's actually time to give away a Component One Studio to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club. But first, let me tell you about Grape City Active Reports. This is the reporting platform for all your business needs. Design, publish, view, print, and export operational reports such as invoices, expense reports, tax and government forms, as well as strategic and analytical reports such as sales performance, budgeting, and revenue analysis. Active Reports gives you the operation and flexibility you need to turn your data into informative, pixel-perfect reports across the enterprise.
All right, buddy. Who's our winner?
Today's winner, Richard, is Ken Burke.
Congratulations, Ken. Double clappers for you, sir.
Yeah, 3 rounds of applause
there
for you.
There you go.
And Ken just won the Component One Studio. That's a big pile of awesome from our friends at Component One, just for being a member of the .NET Rocks fan club. And if you don't know what that is, go to .NETRocks.com, click on the big Get Free Stuff button, answer a few questions, and join the .NET Rocks fan club. We have thousands of members all over the world, and every show we like to give away stuff from our sponsors. And every December we give away a $5,000 technology shopping spree to one lucky member of the .NET Rocks fan club. But You have to sign up to win. And Joe, it's your turn. You know what's coming. If you had $5,000 today to spend on technology, what do you think you would buy?
I think my laptop is getting a little long in the tooth.
Uh-oh.
It's like a 2011 MacBook Pro 17-inch, and I'd probably buy a new laptop. And I wish they still had 17-inch ones, which they don't, but I'd probably buy a MacBook Pro without that touch bar business.
Yeah.
It's not actually a good
out.
time to get a Mac, is it? It's kind of they're kind of between good machines right now.
I don't like that touch bar idea. I mean, the main reason I would want a Mac is because I want to be able to dual boot to Mac. Which I currently do, and I use the Windows side for development. Although, nowadays you could use Visual Studio on the Mac and Visual Studio Code.
Sure.
I use the Mac side for music production,
Nice.
and I use the Windows side for everything else.
That's funny. I use the Windows side for music production.
You use Sonar, or what do you use?
No, I like PreSonus Studio One, but it's not just that. I just like getting around in Windows better than getting around in Mac OS, and it's just because it's what I'm used to. People who've been using Mac OS forever will say the opposite. That's fine.
Yeah, it's what you know, right? That's what matters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still more familiar and more comfortable on the Windows side, but I like to use Logic on the Mac side. It's pretty nice. So
I'm just wondering when Macs are finally going to have a touchscreen.
I don't think they have any incentive to do that because they want people to buy their touch products,
I think Microsoft is really getting ahead of them there because they're unifying the whole thing with the touch devices and their operating system, and Apple's got like two different operating systems and they're not the same. So
well, you never know. You never know.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens this year. Let's jump back into the components and features. We talked about CloudScribe Core, which is the sort of the authentication, multi-tenants, users and roles and all that stuff.
And that's the piece that excites me because every time you want to implement something like Identity Server, you need some place to create. Where do I identify users? How do I map to them accounts and so forth? So I'm just glad somebody's doing it for me. I don't want to write that code.
Yeah, Identity Server is great, but you still have to write all the forms and the log in and did you forget your password and all that other stuff.
The administration.
Exactly. And even, ASP.NET Identity doesn't have that pre-built for you either. So I've got that all built for you. So come and get it, come and use it, give me feedback.
All right. And let's talk about CloudScribe Simple Auth.
Okay, so that is I should tell you the origin of some of these things. Really, when I started working on CloudScribe Simple Content, I was really basing that on Mads Christensen's mini blog.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so, some of the key points out of that was that it had very simple authentication. It wasn't like a complicated system. It was like you put some stuff in a config file that's your user and you can log in, and so I wanted to build something simple like that so that you could use simple content without CloudScribe Core necessarily. If you're just wanting to put up a blog site and nobody needs to log in but you, less attack surface, less code in general, and just use that. And even NoDB is sort of came from that. The idea came from it too. I mean, not using a database has been around for a long time. I mean, Blog Engine and all these other things that used XML and even the mini blog project used the same XML format as Blog Engine. And so I was kind of attracted to that because I figured, well, if I build this thing and people want to migrate to it and they're already in, Blog Engine or mini blog, they can just take their posts and drop them in. So those were the ideas for it. And Simple Auth is just something, it does use one piece of the identity and it uses the password hasher so that you can, your password actually, the username and the password goes in your config file, but you can hash it ahead of time with the utility page that I created so that it's, it's hashed. It's not there in clear text in your config file. And, if all you need is a few people to log in and you don't need people to register on your site, then that's a very simple thing to use with a very small footprint and very little attack surface. And, you want to keep your config file secure, but that's something you need to do anyway. And even if they get that, if the passwords are hashed, then they're not going to be able to get in. So
now all these things sound really cool, but let's just be clear. These are .NET Core only. Do you have MVC versions of them for the full .NET framework, or does it matter?
Well, it can, .NET Core can run on the full framework. So, if you want to run it on the full framework, you can. But yeah, this is all .NET Core compatible code.
Got it.
So yeah.
Okay. So you kind of talked about simple content and simple auth there at the same time.
Yeah, let's talk more about simple content. In Mads Christensen's thing, the main way to edit was Windows Live Writer, and so I, taking a page from that book, I implemented it with Open Live Writer. I guess it would still work with Windows Live Writer too. It's the same APIs and whatnot.
And just to be clear, Live Writer is a client app that allows you to sort of write blog posts without the clunky web-based text, WYSIWYG editors that we have, which, is as good as they are still kind of a pain.
Yeah. The only downside is it's a Windows-only app. Maybe someday that'll be cross-platform too, but it's a nice thing for a desktop app to blog with. So it also has a web-based editor. Currently, it's got Bootstrap WYSIWYG editor, which is also what Mads used. But I'm working right now to integrate CK editor, and I'm going to have a nice file browser and media management thing for the local file system for uploading images, resizing, and cropping. I think with Miniblog, his intention was mainly that people would use Windows Live Writer, so that was sort of not an advanced web editing interface. And now that I've used simple content on a few projects, I've realized, when you got a big page, the toolbar is up at the top, it scrolls out of view, and it's like it really needs something better. And CK Editor is a lot better for that kind of thing. Plus, it supports plugins for everything you ever want. There's zillions of plugins out there for it.
Wow.
Like to paste in from YouTube and have it automatically just set everything up for you and that kind of thing. So that's going to be the next new feature coming in Simple Content, is just better editing experience and better media management. I kind of waited for a while because that was another thing in the early .NET Core days. There was nothing for resizing images, and that's only recently they came out with that core compat system.drawing that provide that. Bertrand Leroy wrote a good blog post about all the current options for that now. And there also wasn't system.net.mail. I'm not sure if that's available now or it's coming soon in 2.0 Net Standard, but I'm using MailKit and MimeKit projects. I don't know if you've heard of those, by a guy named Jeffrey Steadfast. Really excellent libraries, actually probably better than the built-in ones.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And is that simple contact form? Does that use it?
Yeah. Actually, though, but some of that stuff that's reusable, like the email little helper for email, is in a library called cloudscribe.web.common, because I use it in CloudScribe Core for like messages for registering and confirming your email and all that kind of stuff. I use it in Simple Content, like for notifications if someone comments and things like that. And then I also use it in Simple Contact form. So that's kind of a small library with just little helpers in it that are useful in a lot of scenarios. So
but you said it's common stuff, so you only want one copy of it.
Yeah. Oh wait, actually, I'm thinking wrong. Actually, I have it completely separated: a cloudscribe.messaging.email. So it has nothing else but the email. That's right. I was confused for a minute, but I do have that other library, and it has other stuff in it that's commonly used.
Not cloudscribe.entropy, because I love the fact that you have a cloudscribe.entropy. It kind of makes me happy.
I think I just created that as a place to explore, and I stole the name because there's an entropy repo in the ASP.NET repos, and that's where they've got all kinds of experimental stuff. So I just took their lead on that.
I love it. Yeah. It's awesome.
How about CloudScribe File Manager? You say that's an up-and-coming thing?
Yeah, right now the work on that is in my repository for Simple Content, because I'm building it for Simple Content as my main goal, but it's going to be completely, able to use it elsewhere without any dependencies on other CloudScribe components. And basically, I'll have like a kind of a companion library that integrates it with cloudscribe core and cloudscribe simple content. Ultimately, I'd like to build it to where it could work with Azure Blob Storage and S3 and these kind of things. But for now, the first iteration, I'm really just focusing on the local file system. And so, if you were using it standalone, the default configuration would be, the www root folder is where it would start. But for cloudscribe core in the multi-tenant scenario, I'm kind of separating media files below that per tenant. So I've got like a little subfolder per tenant, and I've got something to make sure that the starting point is always there if you're logged into that tenant.
Nice. So I'm really interested in this. Now, just the big picture to go back here, it's really about file and image browsing and uploading, resizing and cropping, etc. Right? Yeah. So so this is a combination, obviously, of JavaScript and HTML and then backend stuff. When you're uploading images and files, do you have the ability to handle large files and do it in chunks and segments with progress bars and all that good stuff?
Yeah, I'm using the Blue Imp jQuery file uploader. I think that there's some issues I'm not sure about yet with that because I'm trying to pass extra form data along with the files, like especially if I want to resize it when it gets there, passing some stuff. And with the streaming, at least with this particular plugin, it looked like you can't do that as like a multi-part form. So I may have to make like a separate thing for very large files to do that. Yeah. But that's probably not going to be an issue typically with images, although I guess they are getting bigger these days with all the megapixels and whatnot.
Yeah, well, and the problem of people not understanding image sizes and stuff
upload a full-size image and just use that and change the size and the markup, right?
It's not going away. I mean, people aren't getting smarter about that.
Well, and it's this whole other discussion. I don't know if we've ever really done this on the show about these, ultra-high resolution monitors where you really want a high-res picture.
You want at least 200 DPI anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But you can, right.
Well, the way I'm doing it with I'm sort of trying to lead them down the path of success to where it's by default, it's going to be checked and it's going to have some, resize it to like 550 pixel width.
Just no dumb, right? Like it's just less dumb, please.
The option by default, it would actually keep the original and it would make the resized one link to the original so that you could still see the full size image.
If you wanted to get it.
But there will be an option to say, not to keep the originals in case, if you got not a lot of file storage in your web hosting or whatever, and you don't want to accumulate all these huge images. So it'll be configurable for that kind of thing.
See, I think the browsers should take this on because that is the point where people, using the browser, that's the point where people decide, I want this image to go to this server, right? The browser knows that. And the browser should be smart enough to say, hey, guess what? This JPEG file is 4 megabytes. Are you sure? Do you want me to resize this for you so it's manageable,
Because otherwise every site has to fix that problem.
Yeah, and every user gets a postage stamp thing that comes draws, like a 1 pixel per second.
Yeah. It still amazes me when I visit sites like that and you can just see the images loading and you can tell that they're big.
That's
an amateur move, right?
That is the web equivalent of fingernails on a chalkboard. That's what that is.
Yeah.
Right? It literally makes the back of your neck crawl.
But, fingernails on a chalkboard is at least deliberate, That's just like a oversight. That's kind of like burning pine nuts, It's like you don't have any experience with this, do you?
No, you looked away from the pine nuts, didn't you?
Yeah.
Too easy to do.
That's a con move right there.
Right there.
Okay, so file manager, that's very cool, and I'm definitely into using a lot of these things. What about navigation? Cloudscribe navigation. Let's talk about that.
Okay, so the way that works is sort of like what we used to have with the old MVC sitemap provider, where you've got an XML file or a JSON file. It's configurable to kind of be the root part of your navigation. So, like for Cloudscribe Core, the administrative pages are just declaratively listed in there in the XML file, and what roles are allowed to see the menu node for each thing. So unless you're logged in as administrator, you're not going to see the administrative menu.
Yeah.
Of course, that's not, you don't want to think that that's securing your page. That's just filtering the menu.
Sure.
You still have to secure the page, and we do that too. But then, you need something for a CMS like simple content. I don't know. I'm reluctant to call it a CMS. Really, that's too big of a word. But it's dynamic pages that you create and they get into storage. So, the menu's you're not going to go edit an XML file and add a page to your menu. So basically the way I built it was, where there can be multiple tree builders, and in that XML file, a particular node can be marked with a tree builder that will be invoked, at runtime. So, I plug in the one that I built for simple content, and I just, declaratively add that into the XML, and then when it builds the tree, it says, oh, here's another tree builder on this node, and it goes and builds a subtree and puts it on that node. And then, when you're doing that dynamically, then that dynamic builder has to also make all the attributes, what roles can view this thing, what not, like that.
Yeah. Okay.
But so it's, and then, along with that, so it's basically a view component that gives you your models for the navigation, and then it's just different views for breadcrumbs or extended menu or top nav or various kind of things. And
this is all MVC stuff, but if I wanted to do some more interesting UI, I could use something like React.js, couldn't I?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting discussion to have, is, the whole MVC versus SPA thing. And,
right.
And I think when people build SPAs, they pick a framework and then they build the whole UI with that. And so whether you're a React guy or an Angular guy or whatever, and, I've heard like Sean Wildermuth talk about, he just wants little islands of functionality. If you're starting with an MVC page, I'm not sure that you would use Angular or React right in your page. I mean, you technically could, but that would sort of not be a SPA. That would be sort of an island within your page that would have this like sort of applet so I don't know, the trend seems to be going towards SPA style apps. But
definitely.
Maybe I'm a minority view on this, but I sort of like content to not require JavaScript to be visible.
Right.
Like when I search the web, I use different browsers for different purposes, and I use Firefox with a tool called UMatrix. I used to use one called NoScript, but UMatrix is a much nicer one. So that if I Google search on something or Bing search, and I'm just going to random sites, I land there with JavaScript disabled.
Yeah.
And if I can't see the content, I'm like, oh, this is lame.
Right.
and especially if you're, a product catalog or something, if I'm searching for something I might buy and I can't even read your product description and your price without trusting your site with JavaScript, then I'm probably going to move on or only go to the big name sites that I already trust, like Amazon or
right,
whatnot.
What you just said essentially is that if JavaScript is required for me to see anything, then how's Google ever going to find your content, find your website based on your content?
Google will crawl your website with JavaScript, so
sure.
they'll see it no problem. In fact, they'll provide me the link to get to your site, but then I have to trust your site. And if I can't see anything that gives me a basis to trust your site, I might not.
You'll just move on. Yeah. And I do that all the time as well. I don't see what I wanted to see. I move on.
Yeah.
Are we a minority because we're like technical and we understand to protect ourselves? I mean, everyone sort of...
I don't know. I think people are impatient. These sites where all the ads render fast and first. And then sometime later, some part of the content shows up.
And that's when I say, I'll find it somewhere else.
Yeah. Here, have a bounce from me.
Right.
But in contrast, so if I land on a site and I can see, oh, this is what I'm looking for, or maybe they've got a product and I can see the price.
Yep.
If I'm going to buy it, then I'll enable JavaScript and I'll go and proceed and check out, But if I had not even seen the content, I probably never would.
Yeah.
So there's I don't know when people decide whether are we going to build this as an MVC or a spa app, whether they even think of these kind of things. I do, but I'm just not sure that that's mainstream.
We're definitely
thinking
having
on
conversations
my
about
part.
what makes sense as a spa and what doesn't.
Right.
And there's lots of, I think spa is interesting because it's not a question of should that be a regular web page, should that be a spa? It's should that be a traditional desktop client or should that be a spa?
Yeah.
And that to me is kind of a big deal because, hey, no deployment headaches, auto updates. Like there's a lot of advantages for spa from traditional desktop client if you get the feature set that you want.
Right.
But
well, and the other
pages.
advantage, that I see advantage of spa style, I guess, is that it lends itself to mobile apps because you can take a spa site and you can, Apache Cordova and even make it an app store app. So you're like almost there to it building an app if you start as a spa app. So
there's more there anyway.
There's a lot of advantages to that kind of thing. And of course, even with MVC, we use JavaScript for a lot of advanced features.
Yeah.
So if you're going to trust the site, you're going to have to enable it at some point to get the functionality. But I don't know. There's too many sites that are just empty. I see these empty pages.
Yeah. And isn't that really just a failure of testing? You should test every page with JavaScript off just so you know what's going to happen.
Right.
Yeah, I think you should at least be able to log in. You should be able to submit a form and log in and set a cookie without JavaScript if you own the site.
I mean, if nothing else, just being able to say, hey, if you don't turn JavaScript on, nothing good's going to happen here. Not blank. Blank's not acceptable.
Imagine a scenario, like the WordPress sites are always vulnerabilities and people get hacked. And what if you own the site and your site is hacked and now you're afraid to visit your own site?
Yes.
Or, this malware is going to come into your browser. So you want to be able to turn off JavaScript, visit your site, and you still want to be able to log in and maybe clean up the content. I guess you could, do it by FTP or some other ways of getting in there to try to clean things up. But you at least want to be able to get back in and look around and see what the damage is without JavaScript.
I don't know how many people turn off JavaScript because it's not that easy to do.
No.
It's not like it's a button on the toolbar. You've really got to work
it is if you have a browser plugin like UMatrix, which by default, it only lets in like CSS and images from the origin domain of that site. And then you can like click little boxes. It'll show you what stuff it's wanting to load, and you can approve it case by case. And it helps with privacy too, because you can block the third-party tracking cookies and various stuff, and still allow the script from the site to come through.
We'll put a link to that. I want to get through some of this stuff. You have a few more reusable components, sort of miscellaneous ones, and we can probably just link to those. But I really want you to talk about this case study that you mentioned in your notes.
Yeah. So the project I did for a company in the UK called Exegesis, and they're kind of data spatial mapping specialty type of outfit.
Is that called? Is that pronounced exegesis? I
don't know.
I've heard it pronounced exegesis. That word.
Their domain is ESDM. So I think of them as that, and I'm sure that's Exegesis Spatial Management acronym or whatever. But they do a lot of government work, and they used to use Mojo Portal a lot, and that's how I've known them for years. They've done a lot of projects on Mojo Portal, and they actually originally had asked me if I would be interested in helping them with this project using Mojo Portal, and I was like, no, I turned it down, And then a little while later, he came back and he said, well, what if we did it with CloudScribe? Would that make any difference? And I was like, yeah, that'd make all the difference.
Yeah.
So basically, it's a small project. It was historic place names in Wales, and it's historicplacinames.rcahmw.gov.uk. That's the English version of it. And then there's a link in the top corner. There's also a separate domain for Welsh. So the very important aspect of this was that it had to be localized. It's a multi-tenant thing with two sites that are identical, except one's in English and one's in Welsh.
Right.
And they wanted, had pretty high standards about that. Like even the URL segments, they didn't want like English fragments in the URLs if there was a reasonable corresponding Welsh fragment that could be used. So we did all that, and there's like a language switcher in the top corner of the site. No matter what page you're on, you go to the same corresponding page in the other site. which is tricky for some things like the blog. It sort of relies on some rules that if they make a post on the English side, they have to make the corresponding post the same day on the other side. And if they do more than one a day, they have to do them in the same sequence on both sides.
Wow.
And that way we can easily go find it because it's a completely different URL. It's a completely different domain.
Sure.
There's really nothing to map them other than, okay, this post is from this date and it's in this sequence. So this is the one that matches. And that's how we did that. For other things, we just kind of created a little map to map some URLs back and forth, just known by the URL itself. But for blogs, it was a little trickier.
Okay.
And so, the main gist of the project was just this searchable database of historic place names that will bring back data and maps. And to focus on that, it was a real big advantage using the cloudscribe components because they had other requirements. They wanted editable pages. They wanted a blog. They wanted a contact form. But, that wasn't the main gist of the project, and it wasn't a big budget. And so the advantage was I basically have all this stuff kind of built. It, just requires wiring it up, configuring it the way they want it.
Right.
And then, the customization of things, again, when you've got interfaces that you can inject. If you don't like the way the default one works, then we write a custom one and plug it in. And it really made it easy to meet their goals to do that kind of thing. And it made it where most of the actual effort after things were set up was the actual feature they wanted. So, we could focus on that and not spending a lot of time, how are we going to do security? How are we going to do navigation? How are we going to do content? All these things are like, I got that sorted out already. So let's just focus on the main feature. And
you said that you used one of the cloudscribe components, web localization, to do this, right?
Yeah, that's something that I built kind of just because I wasn't completely happy with the way, it's an improved system. The localization, I think, in ASP.NET Core has improved over previous stuff. But, when you build websites for people, a lot of times it's not just localization. Sometimes they want to customize labels too.
Sure,
they want to be able to change it. So one of the issues I ran into, because I'm trying to build these components that you just distribute with NuGet packages. So I've got, controllers in a NuGet package. And the way the localization system works is great for the main web app itself. You can just create the built-in ASP.NET like localization. You can just tell it, here's the folder to point to, and the resx files will go in there. And pretty much anything in that main web app, you can drop a file in and localize it. We're using the iString localizer.
Nice.
The problem was that when it's in a class library, it didn't work, So I had to look at how the actual code, and basically I forked the Microsoft implementation and said, okay, if you don't find the resource here, look in this other place too, where it's so that when it's a class library, it can go ahead and look in the main web apps folder and say, if there's a resource file there, then just go ahead and use that.
Right.
And so that made it possible. I can just drop in a file with English and let them translate it to Welsh. And
Wait,
you do have to recompile.
You don't speak Welsh?
No, I don't. But it's a very interesting language to look at.
They definitely need to buy a vowel. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Or maybe give a couple back.
There are some interesting place names that I just, stumbled over when I was working on it. There's
it's
interesting. Vomit Point was one,
nice. I get to the top of the hill and then I throw up.
That's right.
Well, Joe, we're out of time. Is there anything else that you want to bring up or mention just before we wrap it up?
I just hope that people will try this stuff out and give me feedback. And, I'm hoping it saves other people time on their projects too, and that you can take advantage of this stuff. I'd like to see it become more popular, and
certainly in our consideration for humanitarian.
Trying to share the love.
Right.
Sure.
I have a few ideas for it as well. Joe Audette, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure. Thank you guys so much for having me on.
You bet. All right, and we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks. .NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and of course in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time.
Got transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a toy boy. Life is hard.